you feeling better?
I am. Yeah.
Just waiting a second for Lisa.
Okay.
What office do you work in?
One department of IT.
Oh,
So,
but you don't work in the IT.
I don't work in
In
the
that-
service desk. I work with the software, like Colleague. I don't know if you've heard of Colleague before. It's what holds Gale Express, like all the data in Gale Express and Moodle.
Wow.
Or I work with some of the Moodle people. But
So did you train in the computers?
yeah. No, I did not. I got a job in telephone services when I graduated here, and then they coached me and trained me.
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah.
In the administration schools run.
That's true.
Sometimes I don't want to.
Hi, Jermaine.
Hi.
So Felicia is having health issues. Hopefully she'll be okay. Excuse me. Okay. So I actually have to leave today at 12:55 so I can go to the senior showings of the dance concert. Before we start talking about rehearsals, anybody have questions about any assignments?
And Matthew, I actually have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
The first question, it relates to the assignment that we're creating the sign-in sheet for an audition as well as the flyer. If I'm currently working on a project where I have an audition list, could I not use that? And then if there is a breakdown for the audition, could I also use that as my materials for you?
Of course.
Okay, excellent. And then the other thing is, I don't have access to the video of the theater with the glossary terms.
I know, I'm still trying to figure out why I can't send it.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much.
I don't know what's going on. In fact, I'm trying to send it again right now. I downloaded the Google Drive to my phone, prepare it. They prepare the video for sending, and Google Drive piece of equipment I have. So I need to do more research. So today is the first of 2 days that we're going to talk about rehearsal. And the book talks a lot about items that really only relate to theater productions. So I'm going to try to avoid those as much as possible. Though in your reading, it's probably helpful for you to know what they are anyway. And there's a little bit of talk today on how to act as stage manager in rehearsal, but we're going to do more of that on Monday. And I have quite a lot of information from stage managers for dance productions that hopefully will be helpful. And then at the end, there's actually some stories or case studies, if you will, that are a great way of going what you can run into. And I'm sure you all have stories as well. So this is a mix of what's coming from the book and other information that I have. So now you've done all the paperwork that you could possibly do before rehearsal starts. That's everything we've done up to this point. And so now we're ready to jump into rehearsals. So the very first thing is notifying the dancers, and probably everybody. My feeling is creative staff doesn't need to know the detail of rehearsals, but it can't hurt for them to have the information about general things about rehearsals. And they often come to the first rehearsal when there are a lot of things talked about. And if the show is complicated from a production standpoint, they may very well make a presentation. In the theater, that's fairly standard. At the first rehearsal, the set designer shows their model, and the costume person shows their costume plates. If the lighting design is complicated, I sometimes make a presentation as the lighting designer, but that often happens at the first rehearsal. In theater, that's generally prior to a run-through, which you would not have in a dance rehearsal. So you've notified people in every possible way: email, Google Drive, the call board, Facebook group if you're using that, all the methods you have. Can't hurt to get a check-in from everybody, especially if you've auditioned for the piece way in advance of when rehearsals start, and the last communication you've heard from them is them agreeing to take on the part. So you probably, when you want to send out that information, you want their response. People do things to get people to respond instead of just saying respond. They say respond with your favorite color or something like that. But anyway, you do need to get people to respond. And it's a good time to figure out if everybody is a good communicator, and not everybody is. And as much as we have strict rules here at St. Mary's that anybody involved has to use their St. Mary's email account, there are people who just don't do it. And so try as you will, you probably will have to use different methods for different people. But texting tends to be pretty good. Most people text, and you can usually get a response pretty quickly. But this is a good time to see if people respond to you in 24 hours. And then if they don't, you can give them a little lecture on why they should respond to you in 24 hours. Or you don't give them a lecture, you find out if they're having difficulties responding to you and finding out why they can't, which is the approach we use in rehearsal and performance, finding out the reasons before chastising somebody for not doing a particular job. The next thing I would do is to meet with the choreographer and see how they want to run rehearsals. It can be wildly different in different situations, because choreographers, I think for a number of reasons, are used to doing a lot of the stuff themselves, mainly because before they even had a stage manager, they were doing everything themselves. So they were used to doing that. And they may still want to do it, but it's good for you to delineate the roles and responsibilities and then really try to stick with that in rehearsal, because it can be very, I don't know, it can be upsetting, and it also can be confusing to the cast when they're getting directions from two people about the same item. So and that can really, it can develop into a huge problem. So it's something that you should be aware of, not only as you set it up before the first rehearsal, but as you go along. If the choreographer did something in rehearsal that you think is your responsibility, you may want to talk to them after and say, well, do you want to continue? Do you want to take on that role, or do you want me to do it? Okay. And then in terms of what you need to bring to the first rehearsal, medical forms. I posted a sample medical form to Moodle. I've asked you to fill one out. probably do it for yourself. When you get the medical forms back, remember to put them in your binder. Sometimes the student stage managers give me the medical forms, and it's I don't need the medical forms. You need them in case something happens during rehearsal or performance. Other forms that you may need at St. Mary's, students have to sign a drug and alcohol form. And there can be, I guess there could be other forms. This is separate from any contract that may have been signed, though contracts may be distributed at first rehearsal. But I'm not going to go into that right now because it's not usually your area to generate contracts. Company rules. This is a really good time to hand out company rules. You may, you want to keep them short and sweet, but you do want to go over them in the meeting instead of just handing them out, possibly by, excuse me, drooling. You can have people go around the room and have people read different sections of it, but it's really good to have the rules and regulations out there so you can refer to them later on when things don't go as planned. And just a reminder, that should also be posted on the call board and on the website if that's appropriate. So then you need to be sure that your stage manager kit is all ready to go and that you have all the supplies that you need. And I'm going to talk about setting up the space for rehearsal, but let me mention here. So, well, I'm going to mention it later on. I'll mention it. Yeah. And then the other thing is you may have created a contact sheet already. You may know all the information on all the dancers. If so, you want to pass it around and have them sign off on it to be sure the contact information is correct. It's also a really good time for performers to list their name the way they want it to appear in the program, which you will check with them again when you have, a program to review, but it's best to just get all that information at this one time. So that's what you need to bring as the stage manager. Anything else that you guys can think of? I'm going to talk about what you need to set up the space in a minute, which is a huge list. So maybe after that, you'll have ideas of things that you would bring. So preparing the space for rehearsal. Hi, Taylor. So the space is often a dance studio and not the performance space. I would say 99% of the time it's not the performance space. And you may have just rented it for rehearsal. So it is really important that you have all of the following items and you've confirmed that you have all these items in the space before the first rehearsal. So if you've rented a space, you want to do a walkthrough of the space with the facilities manager of that space prior to first rehearsal. So first aid kit. Some spaces have them and some don't. I think most places are required to have them, but like we have an industrial strength first aid kit in the light cage as well as in the shop because we're required to, but we would have them anyway. But whatever you have access to, and some of those items may not be things you necessarily would have in your stage manager's kit, but double check because I gave you this long list of what you need in your stage manager's kit. And when you start out as a stage manager, you may not be able to afford to put all those things in your kit. So if you don't have all of the first aid, you need to go to whoever handles the money for the dance company and say, I need money to buy these items for a first aid kit. And you can check on the stage manager kit list to see what you need. I think you can probably intuit what you need and those items that are particular to for dancers. Okay, and then in terms of setting up the space for rehearsal, in general, the stage manager should be at the rehearsal space at least a half an hour in advance of the dancer's call. In the best of all possible worlds, you have even an assistant stage manager. So whether it's the stage manager or the entire stage management team, they need to be there in advance so they can set up so you can set up for rehearsal. Okay, so we've talked about some of these items in terms of the space for auditions, but you also need these for rehearsal, so I'm going to review them. You need to be sure with the facilities manager that you have all the keys. You know everything about the security system, so you can open and close the space properly. You need to have proper lighting. You need to find out about the temperature in the room, which we talked about on Monday, about how important that is for dancers. And you need to be sure that there's proper sound equipment in the room, whether that's a piano for an accompanist or a sound system, a decent sound system. And if not, you would have to bring that with you. The floor needs to be swept and mopped before every rehearsal. Not very much fun, but must be done. Not necessarily at the first rehearsal, but at some point into rehearsals, you're going to want to mark the center line and the quarter line in the room. If you have a rental space, you can put the spike tape down each time you use it. Or the other possibility is, depending on the skill of the dancer, sometimes you make, I'm sure there's a word for this, but I don't know what it is. You take a long piece of canvas that's the width of the stage, and you mark every 5 feet all the way across the stage. And you start at 0, and you go out from there, like 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. Which can, it can really help if you're doing something like ballroom dancing with a large company, where placement is paramount. And when I say it's a piece of canvas, it's like a canvas, I don't know. It's like the kind of canvas that you put attached to the bottom of a drop or to the bottom of a leg. It's not just a raw piece of canvas. It's folded over and sewn. And then you take a Sharpie and mark it. And the advantage of having that, even if you only need a quarter line and a center line, is you just roll it up at the end of each rehearsal. So it can't hurt. I think it's a really good thing to have. You need tables, chairs, and the right kind of light for both yourself and the choreographer. You need all of your office supplies, and you need extra office supplies for the choreographer, who I can assure you is not going to have what they need, especially light. They never have it. As a lighting designer, I usually have to pass out work lights to more people than I should before these rehearsals. So it's always good to have extra light for them as well. If you really want to be generous, and this is a really good way to set up a rapport with the dancers, is to have enough pencils for all of the dancers and a little spiral notebook, the ones that cost like 99 cents. And that is something that costs money, but it's a great thing to have and a great way to start rehearsal. You need to find out if there's a warm-up area separate from your rehearsal space. And it's good to check what kind of space you have around the rehearsal space, like what in the theater would be offstage space. In most dance studios that I've been in, there's 0 offstage space, or like a foot. And if the space is not exactly the size of the stage you're going to be performing on, you're going to want to mark out the perimeter of the stage. Not necessarily for the very first rehearsal, but as soon as it can't hurt to have that in the space. And you can find out the easiest way for you to do it so you don't have to run very expensive spike tape around the space every time you use it, if it's a rented space that you're sharing with all kinds of other dance companies. If you happen to be doing a piece that's got scenery, you should have floor plans or preset diagrams so you know exactly where that scenery goes, and that needs to be spiked. You can see more and more why it's a pain in the ass to rent a place and have to put down these spike marks every time you come into the space. But if you do have scenery, you do need to do that. So that's something that whoever's designed the scenery, whether it be a scenic designer or the choreographer, they're responsible for giving you the floor plan so that you can lay it out on the floor. You can see a sample of that for the play that's marked on the stage right now for Three Sisters, but I think you probably all know what it means. Hand props need to be set off stage. Rehearsal costumes need to be available if needed. I think generally that comes down to rehearsal skirts. If somebody's performing if they're performing in long dresses or skirts, you're going to want rehearsal skirts. Generally, dancers have their own shoes, and there's no way you can provide them shoes unless they've made special arrangements with the company. So you can see why it's ideal to have assistant stage managers or production assistants, especially if you have to do all of this every time you go into a space. And this is also why it's really good to have a complete running list of every single thing you do. So you've already started out by doing a performance analysis, whatever kind of analysis you can do for the dance piece you're working on. You've done as much as you can in advance, whether it's scene breakdown, like, which dancers are in which part of the dance, a list of the music and the sound, all of that stuff that you're doing in a very complicated way for Swan Lake. So you'll have all of that. That can become the basis of a running list. I'm the kind of and then this running list would grow and you can use it for performances. Obviously things are going to change when you move into their performance space, but to me, it's a relief to have a list that says, turn on this light, lock that door, so you just don't have to think about it, because you're constantly going to be dealing with issues that come up that you haven't planned for. So can you think of anything else you would need to do to prepare space? Yes, you probably need resin in the space. If it's ballet, the floor could have to be mopped in a certain way with soda pop in it. Like, I don't know what the latest thing is in terms of preparing Marley for ballet dancers, but a lot of times it involves 7-Up or Coca-Cola. All of those things would have to be done, based on the kind of dance that you were doing.
And Robin, for non-ballet, just shoes, like on wood surfaces, that's been the time that it's been needed the most in my experience.
Having, preparing.
Not having Marley and doing any other style of dance that includes shoes because it's too slippery on a wood surface that hasn't been well cared for, or even a brand new wood surface.
Yeah, so it's really important to ask the facilities manager, can we treat the floor this way? And also always remember to ask them if people can tap or use flamenco shoes in a space, or any kind of shoe that could possibly harm the floor. Unfortunately, with that, you're going to have to clean all of this stuff up at the end too. So it could make for a very long time for the stage managers. So now you're all set for the first rehearsal. And it's really important at the first rehearsal to make everybody feel as comfortable as possible. You need to communicate to the choreographer that you're not going to just jump in and start rehearsing at the very first rehearsal, especially if it's a pickup company. You really need to have the time. You need to tell the choreographer, I need X amount of time to do this kind of housekeeping stuff that I need to do. But it's also really to create the best kind of atmosphere, which we talked about somewhat when we talked about auditions, so people feel supported and included. So generally the first thing is, it's nice if there are chairs for everybody, or you can sit on the floor and everybody introduces themselves. And now it's generally done so that people can tell you what pronouns, designations that they use now for their names. It's, I think, probably a very polite thing to do. You have handed out those things we talked about, company rules, medical form, and any other forms that the dancers need to fill out or to follow. Answer any questions people have. And then any kind of overview that you want to give as stage manager. You can do this different ways. To me, it's easier for the stage manager to talk about how they want to run rehearsals before the choreographer talks about how they want to do rehearsals or how they want to work with the dancers. Because once you turn it over to the choreographer, it's just easy to turn it over to the choreographer instead of going back and forth. So then I think you're ready to go. And you all have a lot more experience than I do with this, so please interrupt me at any point if you can think of things that you think would make for a better rehearsal. So I can't remember if this stuff comes out of the book or other books that I've read, but in general, you want to have the most productive results. I mean, you want to get the most productive results out of rehearsal. So you want to be sure that you have a plan and create an environment where the rehearsals can be the most productive that they can be. So yeah, a lot of that has to do with meeting with the choreographer in advance. You know, you could, I think the choreographer, it's very helpful for them to talk about the way they work. Are they going to ask them dancers to improvise for the first 2 weeks? Do you like to do 30 seconds of choreography and then come back and run it again? All of those things that can make it easier so that the dancers are informed and can make for speedier rehearsals. Because as you all know, rehearsal time is extremely limited for these things. The other duty you have as a stage manager is to relieve the choreographer of all the concerns in regard to the mechanics of the production. And we'll talk about this more as we go through, but as much as they can just focus on the choreography, that creates a better environment for the choreographer and the dancers. So in general, the stage manager has no voice in the artistic side of a dance piece unless the choreographer asks for your input, which they certainly do in theater productions. The director often does that. As stage manager, if a choreographer wants your input, I would recommend that if you give them the input, that you tell the choreographer what the input is and they communicate that to the dancers. you shouldn't really be communicating artistic things to the dancers. It just sets up the right channels and leadership. So one thing that I have written down here, and I think that this comes out of the book, and really more has to do with rehearsals once a piece is choreographed and has been performed, and then it goes back into the studio for rehearsing for a future performance. It's generally not your responsibility as a stage manager to be able to teach dancers the choreography. In theater, it is the responsibility of the stage manager. That's
The blocking. you
the
mean?
blocking, yeah. So,
Wow.
and that's in equity rules, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of big Broadway shows now have hired their director. They have all kinds of assistant directors. But the stage manager has to be able, they need to know the show so well that they not only give the blocking to somebody new coming into a cast, but acting notes and all that sort of thing. Just in the way that they give acting notes at the end of every performance.
Hence all the attention to the notation
Yeah.
in
Exactly,
the book.
exactly.
I couldn't follow that.
I was like,
Yeah,
it was
it's
confusing.
it is complicated, and it can be complicated. Not to go into too much discussion of how a theater production works, but the director is constantly changing the blocking. So once again, it's important to understand how the director or choreographer works. We had a huge problem last semester. The director knew the show really well, but she doesn't block the show in advance. So she wants the actors to get up on their feet and do it. And then what she would do was she would tell the stage manager, oh, this isn't the blocking, don't write it down. And then when she got to blocking rehearsals, she turned to the stage manager and said, what was the blocking for the scene? So it was not good. There were big problems. So clarification about that. It's not so much stuff that happens in dance. So I think there are very few dance companies where the stage manager has to notate what the choreography is. There's no, as I understand it, universally agreed upon notation for dance. Am I correct in that? I mean, I know they're different. There are different ones that have been developed over time, but it's not like theater where it's very simple. Sit, stand, cross the stage, that sort of thing. One thing that can be really helpful, though, even though you're not writing down the choreography, for instance, Dana did a piece last spring that was improvised by the dancers. However, she kind of knew when she wanted them to exit and enter the stage. It would be really good if she even had a stage manager. She didn't have a stage manager. But when I was in rehearsal watching as a lighting designer, the dancers were constantly double checking about when they were supposed to enter. So that kind of thing, any kind of action like that you can write down as a stage manager is going to be enormously helpful. And certainly if they move a prop, do anything related to a production element, costume, scenery, prop sort of thing, write that down as well. And this is where video comes in really handy. I know as dancers, you're used to videotaping your work. It has to be the fairly large dance company that can not only afford a stage manager and an assistant stage manager or production assistant. So if you can figure out in advance, a stage manager, how you can record a rehearsal without having to be constantly looking through the camera or through your iPhone, But it is important, and there are other people who are going to use it down the line. And I know it can be a real pain because the stage manager sometimes does have to get up and deal with that stuff. And that doesn't really allow them to run rehearsal, which is what they need to do. So you will need to take down notes in terms of any production element. Anything related to sound, if the choreographer has picked a piece of music, but then decides, I want to stop the music here and do this section in silence. That is something that you would know as a stage manager. We're going to talk about rehearsal reports later. It's because things are moving quickly in rehearsal, it's generally easier, I think, to have a list of the production elements and to have another list, to-do list, so you can write them down, because you're not going to have time to organize these things as rehearsal is going on. So they will talk about costumes, they may talk about props, special effects, projections, all of those items. It is your responsibility to be sure that you know exactly what the choreographer wants, because it is your responsibility to give that information to everybody else who needs to know about it, the sound designer, costume designer, et cetera, et cetera. One other thing that you should do in rehearsals, as soon as the choreographer starts running a piece, is to get a running time, even though it may change if it's not, especially if it's a piece done in silence, or a piece that mixes sound and non-sound, sound and quiet sections, because obviously the length of the piece can get longer or shorter as you go along. But as soon as you start running, every time the pieces run, you're going to want to use your stopwatch on your iPhone to get that. There are lots of people who need that information, including, and don't forget this, the house manager. You're used to giving this information to designers and sound designers, but the person who needs it the most is the person who's running the house. We now here, we have weekly production meetings in the theater program, and the house manager now attends those rehearsals. And she's also the person who's in charge of the marketing and publicity, so she's there for more than one reason. But a lot of times, and I think I mentioned this with earlier classes, we tend to not think about the audience experience. So this is one of these places. I mean, if the house manager may know, oh, well, you've just told me that there are all these choreographers working in different dance studios, and now the piece is 4 hours long. I don't think the audience is going to stand for that, or how are we going to break that up? I mean, they play a really important role because you want an audience that's involved. So at the end of rehearsal, generally the best thing to do is gather everybody again and tell the cast what their next rehearsal is or their next activity. It could be a photo call, it could be a costume fitting. Generally best to announce this, though you're going to communicate it to them via email or Team Drive or whatever. And then at the end of rehearsal, you have to undo everything you've set up and lock up the space. Theaters and rehearsal spaces are, for very good reason, obsessed with security because there's lots of expensive equipment in these spaces. So you need to be sure, check and double check that everything's locked up. I just wanted to make a note about photo calls here because I just mentioned it. So often photo shoots happen right before or right after rehearsal. Hopefully, whatever makes it the most convenient for the dancers. And you need to be sure you are prepared for these and that the choreographer is prepared for these. So first, you of course need to let the cast know who in the cast needs to be there. You need to be sure that if they're wearing costumes, they're going to be wearing something. That their costume designer has set up fittings. It's a huge pain here. We have design meetings starting 6 months in advance of production. The production meeting is just a week ahead of the first rehearsal, and the very first thing you have to do is a photo shoot because the publicist needs to have photos weeks and weeks in advance. And it can be really difficult to set up, particularly for the costume designer who has, of course, not built the costumes and may not have even designed them by that point. And you need to be sure that the choreographer knows what they want in the photo shoot. I want this moment of the dance. So everything needs to be planned. And of course, where it takes place, if scenic elements are needed. I have not personally been involved with a lot of photo shoots for dance, so maybe you guys could tell me more about that. Do any of you have information about when they're done and how they're done for dance concerts?
Most of the photo shoots I've been a part of have either been for recording the event after the fact, in which case we set up, after one of the performances, we have a photo shoot with set things that we're going to take. Or during tech, I've worked with a really good photographer who works with us during tech and just shoots. And that usually gives us, we tech on a Tuesday before a Friday show, and we're able to get enough turnaround on that.
Right.
Just for the local stuff.
Right. Yeah, we have those same calls here, but we also still have publicity calls just because those publicity photos need to be far in advance. Because I know in the dance program here, they do have them, but I've never been to one. I don't know if the photographer just comes and watches rehearsal and takes pictures, or maybe one of the dancers is taking pictures.
For the seniors, they're responsible for hiring a photographer, and they try and do it at the beginning of the semester, so they can have one of their friends edit it in Photoshop and make the cards and the poster. And it's kind of been similar at St. Mary's for the faculty show. I mean, yeah, sometimes in a rehearsal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ones I've been involved in my not lengthy tenure in the dance program, they've used photos from dances of previous dances.
More,
yeah.
In my company, I have two different photo shoots, sometimes three. And that's because I personally liked all of the headshots to be the same looking. So that photo shoot was different than the dancing photo shoot because maybe they wanted their hair down, or it was kind of different on the angle that I wanted to present the dancers per subject matter of the concert, actually. So I usually have three separate ones. So there would be like a photo shoot of classical poses that I could use for any publicity, not just now, but in future days. So if I had a particular dancer in this show that has like an exquisite physical facility, that might not be necessarily what I'm producing next season, but still wanting to have an image of that dancer in my repertory. So pull from for marketing things or website or whatever. And then photo shoot of headshots. And then the group dancing together. So I just wanted to add that there's like several different stages.
And you didn't need to involve the choreographer with the headshots, right?
No, but
I mean, I know often that's the same person.
Because in my particular instance, it was a yes, because the way that I was presenting the dancers in the program through their photo shot, for me, also added to the design of the show. So, for example, when we were doing a more classical and contemporary production, their hair was up for their headshots. When we were doing a really emotional, raw artist piece, like that was the nature of the show, their hair was down. Or maybe, like in that instance, I hired an artistic designer to work with in order to have like their headshots were like crazy makeup and the way that you would see them in the show, and not seemingly separate. So they had like blue streaks of hair coming out, and that was their headshots. So that when you were watching the show, you knew who you were looking at because they were so heavily costumed that you couldn't see. And the dancers put in a request to wanted the audience to be able to pick them out. So it was important for me in that instance to do a headshot that reflected what they were costumed or characterized as in the show.
Did your company have stage managers?
That was it.
Yeah, and you were the choreographer.
There were two artistic directors, and we shared roles and responsibilities. But I definitely picked up the stage manager.
Right. So setting up all of that is the stage manager's responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is running orders. The order of this stuff is somewhat arbitrary. It's just rules and regulations for a good rehearsal. So in terms of running orders, often the running order is not decided until well into the rehearsal period. But once it has been decided, you need, in the first place, as stage manager, you need to be involved with that running order. The choreographer is not going to think about everything technical that has to happen between pieces, I can assure you. So you need to think about, and now those pieces can't be back to back because this dancer's in two pieces and they don't have time to change their costume. And you also, as the dancer's advocate, need to say, that is too much physically for a dancer to do. You know, you have to bring attention to the, you know, maybe there are gel changes. So yes, it can be this running order, but we have to have a pause between those pieces. So you really need to be involved with that. So be sure to first can just do on their own. They tend to think about the dancers and the well-being of the dancers, but they don't think about the other stuff. And so once the running order is decided, it's good to make it as big as possible and post it on the call board, certainly. When you get to text, it needs to be posted everywhere, certainly in both wings, backstage, probably in the dress. It's good to have it in the dressing rooms if the dancers are listening to the show over a speaker, having a running order right there. Because some dancers are in one piece, they're not thinking about the show as a whole. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about accidents and accident reports. I posted a sample accident report to Moodle, and did I just say this at the beginning? So I'm asking you to fill that out. If you don't feel it's an invasion of privacy, probably do it for yourself so you could see what kind of information, because it can be different for different people. You know, we have dancers with epilepsy. So, you know, the stage manager needs to know what to do in case of epilepsy. There are people with all different kinds of disabilities, particular health issues. So it's not just the simple, who's your doctor and what are the names of your closest, you know, your parents or whoever is your, it's not next of kin because you would have died then, but your emergency contact. You want as much detail as you need as a stage manager. God forbid you need next to Kim.
So we're not creating an accident report. We're simply filling it out to see what it's like to
Yeah.
be thorough.
Right. So those accident reports are things performers can forget about them. You need to be sure to get them back by the second rehearsal, because accidents happen whenever they want to happen. So you need to get on them about getting that stuff back. Also, so you've set up the space. It's really important, besides sweeping and mopping, that you've inspected the space for any sort of hazards. I think in this book there were some pretty awful stories about
Yes.
things that happened to people. Yeah, there were more things that happened after tech, and tech and dress and performance is something we're talking about later on, but there are hazards everywhere in the theater. Especially the thing that is usually one of the biggest things is how dark it is off stage. So be sure that you have that taken care of. Also, there are safety regulations for each space. You need to know what you're supposed to do in case of an earthquake. The stage managers here know you're supposed to take the students outside to one of the outdoor spaces. I'm not sure what it is, but I think that's the last thing you're supposed to do in an earthquake, in New York, where skyscrapers can fall on you. Here, it's hard for the buildings to fall on you, so they send people outside. But facilities usually have that information. You need to know what to do in case of fires and earthquakes. So one of the things that I have gotten hung up as a stage manager, when I used to stage manage and have seen other stage managers to do, is what to do in case of an accident. So first of all, you're the stage manager, you're supremely calm, like you're supremely calm about every single thing that you do. But I have now learned that if there is an accident, or there are mental health issues that come up, like dancers who burst into tears on stage. I have come to the belief that you need to follow your instincts immediately. Like, okay, I'm going to get up there and stop this rehearsal and take care of this person. I'm going to stop this performance and take care of this person. It's sometimes like, oh, what am I going to do? I don't want to break up the performance. Meanwhile, the person is up there hurt or sobbing and they're not being taken care of. So I've really come to the belief, think about that person first and act. And I'm sure that, I don't know what it says there's probably union regulations that cover these things, but I've learned that you should just do what is right and don't wait. That's the main thing, don't wait. And then once everything is settled and the person's been taken off to an emergency room or whatever, you need to file an accident report at the end of rehearsal as soon as possible, which goes to everybody involved, probably even including the person who runs the facility. If you're in a rented facility, it's probably best for them to know too. Those insurance issues can arise, though that's not really your concern. I think there was a story in here about insurance, something that happened at San Jose Musical. Here. I am going to stop there today. We have a whole bunch of other stuff to talk about, and we will continue that on next Monday. Okay? If I don't see you, have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.